Hi, welcome back to another very exciting Copycat Wednesday here at the Photoshop Training Channel. My name is Jesus Ramirez. I hope that you're staying healthy and safe. In today's Copycat Wednesday, I'm going to show you how to recreate the lightning from the running scenes in the Flash TV show. I got a comment by Kumane who suggested to do the Flash logo, and although I like the idea, I have already done a Captain America logo which teaches basically the same techniques except for the lightning. And that got me thinking to instead recreate the lightning from the running scenes. This seemed like a better idea because it gives me the opportunity to share many more techniques that I haven't really shown before. By the way, in case you don't know, Copycat Wednesday is my new series where I recreate something using Photoshop. It could be a movie poster, album cover, a color style, anything really. Remember to leave your suggestions for future episodes down below in the comments. Like all the other Copycat Wednesdays, this is my interpretation of how I would achieve a certain result. Okay, let's jump right into this week's Copycat Wednesday. This is the image that I'm going to work with. Is a photo of a toy Flash. This is obviously a toy from the DCEU Flash played by Ezra Miller. I personally like Grant Gustin from the Arrowverse better, but this toy is pretty cool, so that's what we'll use. Let me know in the comments who you like best. And if you want to follow along with me, you can download this and all the other files that I'm going to use from the link below in the description. This toy is going to be our main image. I labeled the layer Barry. Spoiler alert, Barry Allen is the Flash. But what we're going to do is extract the toy from the background. And if you're working on an older version of Photoshop, what you need to do is select the quick selection tool and click and drag over the toy to make a selection. But if you're in a new version of Photoshop, you're much better off using one of the new quick actions. If you go into the properties panel, you'll see the quick actions here. One of them is remove background. If you don't see it, that's because your background layer is locked. So if the layer has a lock on it, click on it, the lock will go away. And under quick actions, you should see this remove background button. When you click on that, Photoshop will use artificial intelligence, machine learning technology known as Adobe Sensei to find the main subject of the image, create a selection, and apply a layer mask to it. It does a fantastic job, as you can see in this case. You can obviously make adjustments to this layer mask by selecting the layer mask and going into selected mask. And what I'll do is use the global refinements to make some adjustments. I have the view set to black and white. That way I can see my actual layer mask. And what I'm going to do is just drag on the smooth slider to smooth those edges. And I'm also going to apply a bit of contrast, and I'll press OK. So that we can see the result, I'm going to create a solid color adjustment layer, make it a dark gray, and place that below the toy layer so that we can see what that selection looks like. And it's pretty good. If your selection is not as good and you see fringing, those white halos that you sometimes see on masks, then you can remove them or at least minimize them by selecting the layer mask and going into Filter, Other, and Minimum. The minimum filter allows you to contract a mask based on a radius of pixels. And you can also apply an algorithm to preserve either roundness or squareness. If you're working with an organic object, then roundness should be the better algorithm. If you're working with a man-made object like a building or something like that, then maybe squareness. Even though this is a toy, it's still representing a human being, so roundness will probably be the better choice. So I'll select that, and then I can increase the radius. And as you can see, the radius pushes in that selection accordingly. Obviously 14 pixels is too much, so I'll reduce it back down to either 1 pixel or maybe just a little bit less. So maybe 0.5 in this case, and I'll press OK. I'll double click on the hand tool to fit the image to screen, and you can see my result. What I'll do next is bring in a background, and I found this really cool stock image that is already color graded, and it will do great for this image. Again, the link to all these images are below in the description. And by the way, to open up an image, you can go into File and Open. Then locate the file in your computer. Photoshop will open it up in a new tab, and then you can select the Move tool, click and drag that layer onto your working document. Just hover over the tab. Photoshop will switch over automatically, and then release your mouse button to release the image. You can then press Control T on Windows, Command T on the Mac to transform. If you can't see the transformation handles, you can press Control 0 on Windows, Command 0 on the Mac to zoom out into the bird's eye view and see the corner transformation handles. Then you can transform the image by clicking and dragging on those transformation handles. I'll place the image right about here and click on the check mark to commit the changes. I'll press Control 0, Command 0 on the Mac once again to zoom in, and then I'll drag the layer below the berry layer, and I'll call this layer background so that we keep organized, and just adjust it accordingly. I'll move it down just a little bit, right about here, and I'll drag it to the left just a tiny bit. Next, I'll select the berry layer and move him a little bit, like so. What I'll do now is select the background, right-click, and convert it into a smart object. A smart object is sort of like a container. It allows us to place one or more layers, and we can apply non-destructive adjustments, distortions, filters, and transformation. In other words, everything is editable, so we can always come back and make changes, and that's the way you usually want to work. So with this background layer, and let me call it background again, after converting it into a smart object, we lost the name, so background. And I'm going to blur it now to make it seem like Barry is running really, really fast. To do so, I'm going to go into Filter, Blur, Radial Blur. Make sure that you select Zoom, and I'll set the quality to best. Don't worry so much about the amount right now. What I want to do first is make sure that I get the zoom in the right place. Unfortunately, there's not a very good preview in this filter, so you're going to have to sort of guess. So place the blur, then press OK, and see how it affects your image. So the blur is a bit too high. I want the blur to be lower, like he's running on the street. So to edit that filter with a smart object, I can go into the Layers panel and double click on Radial Blur and drag that blur down a little bit like so and press OK and see what result we get. And that looks really, really good, and I'll stick with that. Now, if you need a more intense or less intense blur, you can go in there one more time and adjust the amount. So if you want to make it seem like Barry is going really, really fast, you can increase that and you get that effect there. I think that's a little too strong for the effect that I'm going for, so I'll reduce it back down to where I had it before. And I think that blur is pretty good. Next, I'll click on this arrow to collapse the filter just so that we have more room to work with. And then I'll go into Image, Adjustment, Levels, and I'll apply a levels adjustment. I'll click on the black point and drag it to the right to make the darker pixels darker. And I'll click on the white point and drag it to the left to make the brighter pixels brighter. And I can control the contrast with this center point, like so. So adjust it accordingly, maybe something like that. Before and after. By the way, if a window has a preview checkbox, then you can press the P key on the keyboard to enable or disable that preview. P for preview. Pretty cool stuff, right? Anyway, I'll press OK, and now we have our background. Next, let's work with the berry layer, and I'm going to duplicate it to apply a blur. Control J on Windows, Command J on the Mac. Then I'm going to apply the layer mask. So I'll right click and select Apply a Layer Mask. That basically deletes the pixels that were hidden. And that's okay that we did that because we still have the original right below here. And what I'll do is convert this berry copy into a smart object, and I'll call it Berry Blur. This is the layer that we're going to blur to give Barry his blur. And so that we can see what we're doing better, I'll double click on the hand tool to fit the image to screen. Then I'm going to go into Filter, Blur Gallery, Path Blur. And from here, you'll see that there's a path that blurs the image. See, it starts here, and then there's an arrow, a blue arrow pointing to where it ends. So I'll start here in the center of his body, and it will end right there, right at that blur point in the center. And I can create more than one. I can create another one from here, pointing down to the bottom to that same area, and you can double click to end that point. If you click once, then you'll set a point and it won't finish it. So to finish the path, make sure you double click twice. And I can also add one more maybe down here, one click, and double click here to end that point. And what I can do now is maybe create one more over here, pointing to that same area. And I can adjust the speed of that blur, like so. And it's up to you to decide the speed. For me, this seems to work, and I'll press OK. Again, this is a smart object, so I can always edit it by double-clicking on the Blur Gallery label. I'm pretty happy with what I got, so I'll click on this arrow to collapse the smart filter. And then I'll apply a layer mask that hides everything so that I can selectively bring back the blur. So with that berry blur layer selected, I'm going to hold Alt on Windows, Option on the Mac, and click on the layer mask icon to create a black layer mask. That will hide everything in this layer, and I can select the brush tool and paint with white to reveal that blur effect in the areas that I want. So I can just start blurring maybe his arms, because they're the ones that are probably moving the fastest. A little bit off his torso here, his leg, like so. And also his other leg and his arm. Maybe his arm is moving really, really fast. Like so. Totally up to you what areas you want to blur. If you accidentally blur an area that you didn't intend to, like maybe his face, then you can make your foreground color black and hide the pixels on that layer again. White reveals, black conceals. So let me just paint in some blur right up here. So it's totally up to you where you blur the image. Then you can bring down the opacity. 100% is too strong, so maybe bring it down to about 70 or so %. Before and after. Next, with the berry blur layer selected, I'm going to hold Shift and click on the berry layer and press Ctrl G on Windows, Command G on the Mac, and I'll rename this layer Flash. I don't really need this color fill layer, so I'll drag it over into the trash icon to delete it. That way we keep our layers panel clutter-free. Next, we're going to apply the lightning. It comes up as Barry is running some of that Speed Force lightning. Again, I'm using the DCEU Ezra Miller toy for this tutorial, which has blue lightning, but I prefer the Grant Gustin Arrowverse Flash, which has yellow lightning. And I know I'm totally geeking out here. It doesn't matter. Make the lighting whatever color you like. I'm going to make it yellow. But let me show you how to do that. There's basically 3 ways in which you can add lightning into Photoshop. You can use a photo. You can create the lightning in Photoshop, or you can create the lightning in another application, then bring it into Photoshop. So we're going to do all 3. That way you see all the options. And first, let's just work with the most simple one, lightning from a photo. I have this photo of lightning, which looks pretty cool. And again, the link to all these photos are down below in the description under tutorial assets. So with the move tool selected, we'll do what we did earlier. We'll select the image, click and drag it over into our work in documents tab and release. And that places the image over our working document. If I change the blending mode to screen, you can see that the darker pixels disappear and we are left with the brighter pixels, which is the lightning. And it looks really, really cool. This actually looks more like the lightning in the DCEU. It's blue, and that's okay. I can press Ctrl T, Command T to transform, and then press Ctrl 0 to zoom out and see the corner handles. And I can click and drag on these corner handles to adjust the scale of that lightning, and I can just rotate it anywhere that I want. I can right click and flip it horizontal. Can do anything I want to it, right? So let's just place the lightning here for now. And I'll click on the check mark to commit the changes, and I'll double click on the hand tool to zoom the image to screen. So what I want to do now is make the background darker in this lightning layer so that I hide it with the screen blending mode. Screen will make black invisible. So I'm going to try to get it as close as I can to black. To do that, I'm going to go into Image, Adjustment, and Levels, and just click and drag on this black point to make the darker pixels darker, and then they'll become black and they'll disappear. See that? And I can use this midpoint to also make some of those brighter pixels darker, like so. Pretty cool stuff. And I can increase the intensity of the lightning by dragging this white point to the left. Really, really cool. Like so. If you want to change the lightning to a different color, you can go into Image, Adjustments, Hue and Saturation, click on Colorize, and then adjust the lightning to a different color, like so. And I'm going to give it more saturation. If your lightning still has these bright edges, then you can try to make them darker by going into the Burn tool and darkening those edges up so that you don't see them, or you could also mask them out. Totally up to you what technique you use. But In this case, I'm just going to burn them. In other words, I'm making the pixels darker, which makes them invisible with the screen blending mode. The next step will be to distort the lightning embedded around Barry's body. I'm not going to do that just yet. I'm going to show you how to create lightning in Photoshop now. So right now we looked at how to bring in lightning from a source image, from a photo. So I'm just going to delete this layer and show you now how to create lightning inside of Photoshop. By the way, this technique of creating lightning was taught to me by the great Burt Monroy. I consider him to be the best Photoshop artist of all time. He is Photoshop user number 6, so only 5 people have been using Photoshop longer than he has. He co-wrote the very first book on Photoshop, and I learned a lot from him, and this is one of his techniques to create lightning, so a big shout out to my good friend Burt Monroy. But anyway, to do so, I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to go into the gradient tool, make sure that I have the black to white gradient selected, black to white, and make sure that this first box is checked in the options bar, and I'm just going to click and drag to the right like so, and that creates this line there. So with this gradient, what you can do now is make sure that black and white are your foreground colors and go into filter, render, and select difference clouds, and you'll see this shape that kind of looks like lightning, but it's black. If you want to make it white, you can press Control-I, Command-I on the Mac to invert. Then we'll use that same levels technique to make the background black, but still keep the lightning. So I'll go into Image, Adjustment, Levels, and I'll drag the black point to the right to make everything completely black, like so, and then adjust the midpoint here to have our lightning there. Now, the old technique, the one that Burt taught, will end here. All you will do is set the layers blending mode to screen and then adjust it accordingly. But I'm going to take this a step further. So this is my addition to Burt's technique by doing the following. Create a new layer and press Control Alt and the number 2 on Windows, Command Option and the number 2 on the Mac, and that loads the bright pixels into a selection, and I can fill that selection with white. White is my foreground color, so I can press Alt and Backspace. So now in this layer number 2, I have just the lightning. So let me press Control D on Windows, Command D on the Mac to deselect, and I'll just make that background layer completely black. So Control Backspace, Command Backspace on the Mac. So now I have the lightning just on that layer. And what I'll do now is press Control J, Command J on the Mac, click on the Move tool. I have Show Transformation Controls active so I can see the corner handles. And I'm going to click and drag down on this duplicate. And I'm going to drag it up. And I'm going to create some of that forking. Also, I have the pivot point active, the transformation handle here. And if you don't see that, you can enable it by clicking on this checkbox. And I'm just going to click and drag it down and then rotate so that it rotates from that bottom point, and I can continue adjusting it accordingly. So you can just create forks in your lightning like so. And obviously you can spend your time fine-tuning the lightning to look a little bit better. And actually I'm just going to go on to the other side. I think it probably works better if I do it from this side like so. And you can keep just adding more forks to your lightning. I think that you get the idea. You would just duplicate the layer and keep adding forks into it. I'll press on the check mark to commit the changes. And actually, I'll also use the arrow keys on the keyboard to move it a little more because I think it was just peeking through here on the left. But anyway, what I'll do now is select the layer, select the bottom layer, and press Control E on Windows, Command E on the Mac to merge them into one layer. And again, you can even duplicate this layer and create more forks out of it. Totally up to you. But the point is now that I have this lightning layer, I can throw away this black background and I can apply the lightning onto my flash layer. And obviously I would need to distort it accordingly, but we're not going to do that. That's going to be the last step when I show you how to distort lightning. And if you want to have a different color for the lightning, what you can do is go into Image, Adjustment, Hue and Saturation. Make sure you check Colorize and just increase the saturation here and adjust the hue. And if you can't see it, make it just a little darker and you'll be able to see the color like so. So you can select whatever color you want for the lightning. Another way of doing it is by double clicking to the side of the layer and click on outer glow and then adjust the color of the glow accordingly. Maybe you can make it yellow and increase the opacity. Totally up to you what colors you use, but this is another method of colorizing that lightning. I'm going to delete this layer because this is not the method that I'm going to use. I think that the best method to use is to generate the lightning in a different application and bring it into Photoshop. Now, I'm aware that a lot of you may not have this application. I'm going to use Adobe After Effects. It comes with the Creative Cloud. You may have it and just never used it. And I'm going to show you a method that will allow you to create lightning, and it's very simple. Even if you've never used After Effects, you're going to be able to do it. If you don't have After Effects, no worries. You can use one of the two methods I just showed. And I'm also going to provide the lightning that I'm about to create in the downloads for today's tutorial. That way you have access to them if you don't have After Effects. But anyway, the next step is not inside of Photoshop. It's going to be in a different application, and that is Adobe After Effects. Again, if you never use After Effects, no worries. Everything I'm going to show you is very simple that you should be able to follow along. The first step is to create a new project. So I'll click on the New Project button. Then I can click on New Composition here, or go into Composition and select New Composition, either or. The composition name doesn't really matter. The width and height at 1920 by 1080 is good. The background color doesn't really matter. Just press OK. Next, I can right click on this area and select New Solid. And just press OK. None of these settings are important. Next, go into Window and make sure that Effects and Presets is checked. You should see that here on the right. And simply type in the word lightning. And you can select either horizontal or vertical lightning. Those of you that are more advanced might be wondering why I'm not selecting advanced lighting. The biggest reason is that horizontal and vertical lightning are animated automatically. In this case, I'm going to select the horizontal lightning. So I'm just going to double click on it to apply it to my selected solid color layer. And you can see the result here. I have 2 points, and I can click and drag on this point and also click and drag on this second point like so. On the left-hand side, you'll see the settings. By default, we have a two-way strike, and I can change that to any one of these options. For example, direction. Anywhere. You can experiment with the different settings. I'll use direction. Then you can adjust the glow and core settings. Let's start with core. Core is just the inside. So we can change what color the inside of the lightning is. You can make it red, for example, by clicking on the color swatch here. The color picker comes up, and I can change it to another color by selecting it. So now the core is red. That doesn't look very good, so I'm just going to cancel this. I just wanted to show you that option in case you wanted to use it. I'm going to collapse the core settings and also show you the glow settings. Currently, the glow is set to green, but I can make this any other color. For example, I could make it orange and press OK. And to be frank with you, I prefer to add the glow in Photoshop, so that's what I'll do. So I'll set the glow to white and press OK and bring down the radius to 1. I can just type in 1. And maybe increase the opacity to 100, like so. Then I can adjust the turbulence and forking. Let me open up the turbulence slider, and I'll close the glow setting so that you can focus on this slider. With 0 turbulence, you can see that I just basically get one line, and all the way to 125, I get a lot of turbulence on my lightning, and this looks pretty good, so I'll leave it there. Then you have the forking. I can increase the forking all the way to 100%, and you can see all the lightning that we get, or bring it back down to 0, and we just get a straight line. So you can adjust it accordingly. To start out with, around 45 to 50% should work. And I can adjust the decay. Dragging to the right makes it so that the forking lightning strokes are short. Dragging it to 0 makes it so that they're very, very long. So again, you can adjust accordingly and decide where you want your lightning to be. For me, I'll probably make it just a little bit longer, so I'll reduce the decay to at about 0.33. And that is my lightning. Also, remember, we're in After Effects. This is a video application. So if I click and drag on the playhead, you're going to see that my lightning is animated. So that means that I get different versions of my lightning, not just the one that I created. So I can rename a layer by selecting it and then hitting the Enter key on the keyboard. That's the return key on the Mac, by the way. And I'm just going to call this layer Lightning 01. And I'm going to duplicate this layer by selecting it and pressing Control D on Windows. That's Command D on the Mac. You duplicate with a different keyboard shortcut than Photoshop. In Photoshop, it's Control J. In After Effects, it's Command D. So I guess it makes a little more sense in After Effects, D for duplicate. But anyway, with this lightning layer number 2, I can just click and drag it and notice that it animated. So it's no longer the same as the bottom layer. So if I disable it, you can see now that it's different. And that's what I want. I want the layers to look different. I'll do one more. Control D on Windows, Command D on the Mac to duplicate the layer. So now I have lightning number 3. And in this case, I'm just going to increase the forking. So I have a lot of forks in this one. I'm going to disable the other 2 lightning layers so that we can better see the adjustments that I'm making. So I'm increasing the forking. I should probably decrease the decay as well, just so that they're a little longer, and maybe increase the turbulence. So I'm clicking and dragging on the label to increase it, like so. That looks pretty good. Again, I've done nothing that is too difficult, just dragged on a couple sliders. That's it. So I'm sure that you can follow along even if you've never used After Effects. And I could keep repeating this process and create as many lightning layers as I want. For now, I'll just work with 3. And the next step is to get all these layers into Photoshop. Luckily, it's very, very easy to do. All you need to do is go into Composition, then Save Frame As, and select Photoshop Layers. And give your Photoshop document a name. I'm just going to call it Lightning. And I'll put it in the desktop so it's easy to find, and I'll click on Save. Now I can minimize After Effects. So File and Open, and in my desktop, I can open up that Lightning PSD that I've saved from After Effects and click on Open. That will open up this document that contains my lightning. I know it's hard to see, but if I create a new solid color layer, set it to black, and bring it to the bottom here, you'll see my 3 lightning layers. Super cool, super easy. So if you have After Effects, I recommend creating many lightning layers so that you can add them into your composite. So for now, I'm going to use these 3, and I'll make this file available so you can download it in case you don't have After Effects. But anyway, what you would do now is go into Photoshop and use the same technique we've been using, selecting the layer with the Move tool, clicking and dragging it over into our working composition, dropping it in here, and there it is. I'll press Control 0, Command 0 on the Mac to go back into the bird's eye view, and we can distort this layer accordingly. I'm going to click and drag the center corner handle and scale it inwards. Then I can hover outside the corner handles and click and drag to rotate. So what I want to do is I want to have all this lightning going on his arm, but then I want it coming back behind them. And probably the best way of doing that is by scaling this in like so, and then maybe scaling down from here, and make sure that everything is in my document there. And what I'll do now is hit Enter, that's Return on the Mac, to commit those transformation changes. And now let me show you a really cool way of distorting the lightning. With the lightning layer selected, I can go into Edit, Puppet Warp, and you may see a mesh, like so. If you want to keep the mesh, that's fine. I don't like it, so I'll disable it, and I'm just going to click here to add a point. I'll add another point here in the middle, and another one here at the end. And what I can do now is click on these points and drag them to distort the light. So I can have lightning going over his hand, maybe go up higher like so, and then this one coming out down here, like so. Really, really cool way of distorting the lightning to the areas that you want. Also, I'm going to zoom in so that you can see. I'm going to zoom in. I'm holding Alt and scrolling up on my mouse wheel. And when you have a point selected and you hold the Alt key on Windows, that's the Option key on a Mac, you get this circle. And you can click and drag on that circle to rotate it, and that also rotates the distortion. So you may rotate it so that it better blends with your image. I'm going to click on the check mark to commit the changes, and I'll double click on the hand tool to fit the image to screen. What I'll do now is click on the layer mask icon, and now I can paint on this layer mask with a brush using black to hide the effect. So I can hide the effect going behind this body like so. So this is kind of going behind this body. See that? See how some of this lightning is just going to go behind this body? So it's coming from his hand, going back behind them like so. And just coming around. Not over his leg, just going behind them. And the lightning is just trailing behind them like so. So that's one layer there. What I'll do now is add the glow to that lightning layer. So I'll double click to the side of the layer to bring up the layer style window. Then I can click on outer glow. If you're not seeing the screen that I'm looking at, just click on reset to default and you should see this. And let me move this to the side so that we can see the adjustment apply to the lightning. What you want to do is just adjust the lightning accordingly. So you can adjust the size here to glow as much as you want. You can adjust the opacity as well. And you can, of course, adjust the color. And we can select like a yellow or orange color depending on what you want. And you can also adjust the size. See that? See how the size affects the glow? Totally up to you how you want the glow to affect your image. Then I'll press OK, and that's my glow. Another thing that you can do to enhance the image is create a new layer and just call it glow. And what I'm going to do is selectively make some areas glow. So maybe I want this lightning to glow on his body. And what I'll do is I'll just paint with white using a brush with a hardness of 0. So it's very, very soft. And I can increase the size like so and just paint with white like you see here. And maybe some here behind them like so. Maybe here on his forearm as well. And what I'll do is double click to the side of the layer and move the layer style window to the side so that we can see what we're doing. And from the blending mode drop down, I'll select color dodge. Then I'll uncheck this box, transparency, shapes, layer, and you can see how that looks like a glow now. And I can reduce the intensity of the glow by adjusting the fill, not the opacity. If I adjust the opacity, it looks really flat and it doesn't look very good. See that? See how it just looks flat? But if I adjust the fill, then I get a much better effect. See that? Now the lightning is really, really bright in some areas. So you can selectively decide how the lightning shines on his suit. Really, really cool stuff. And if you want to apply an overall glow, what I recommend that you do is go into the Flash folder and just double click to the side of that folder and you can apply the layer styles to the entire group. So I can just select an outer glow and it remembers my last settings. And I can adjust the opacity. Maybe I don't want it to be so strong. And maybe add a little bit of noise. And maybe bring it in. I don't want it to be so intense. Just a little yellow. And I can also add an inner glow. And adjust it accordingly. So let me just increase the opacity here. And maybe change the blending mode to something like overlay. And I'll change the color as well. I'll make it yellow. And increase the size here. Maybe that's way too much, right? This looks like it's a little too much, but I think that you get the idea. I'll bring down the opacity even further, and you can adjust it accordingly. Maybe add a little bit of noise so it's not so smooth. Like so. I'll press OK. And the next step is to add more lightning and just recreate the steps that I just went through. So you can go back into the lightning layer and maybe select the lightning with a lot of forks here. Select the move tool and drag that into our working document. Release the mouse button. Maybe this one could go over his body like so. I'll click on the check mark to commit the changes. And I can copy the glow by hovering over the FX icon, holding the Alt key on Windows, that's the Option key on the Mac, and releasing in the new layer like so. It's up to you how you decide to apply the lightning over the image. Okay, what I'll do next is pause the video, add more lightning layers, and I'll be right back in just a moment. Okay, I'm back, and before I do anything else, I want to show you a couple of the changes that I made. In this lightning group, I have all my lightning layers, including my glow layer that adds the glow to the lightning. And I want to show you the change that I made with the color of the lightning. I wasn't very happy with it. The TV show lightning that comes out of Barry as he's running is closer to red. So I shifted the hues a little bit so they're a little more redder. They're not quite red yet. I kind of like the yellow tone, so I decided to change it just a bit. So let me show you what I have here. If I double click on color overlay, you'll see now that the color overlay is no longer white, is this yellowish color. And the outer glow now is orange. So these are the changes that I made. And I also added another group of layers here called Rim Light, and it adds this glow around Barry. So if you want to learn how to do the rim light, then you can check out my tutorial on rim lighting in Photoshop. This is the same Hollywood technique that I learned from my good friend Lisa Carney. She is a professional movie poster designer. So if you want to learn how to apply this rim light effect, then check that video out. The link to that video is down below in the description. The one thing I will tell you though is if you watch that video, I didn't use a channel pool. I just simply painted over the layer in the areas that I wanted to create the highlights. But to set everything else up, you can check that tutorial out. Anyway, what I'm gonna do now is select the very top group, and I'll press Control-Alt-Shift-E, Command-Option-Shift-E on the Mac. And what that does is it copies all these layers and pastes them into a new layer, like so. So I have one layer that contains the content of all the other layers. And I'm gonna call this Final Image, and I'll right click and convert it into a smart object. And I'm doing this so that I can affect the entire image as one. I could have also placed all these layers into a smart object and get the same effect. The reason that I'm not doing it this way is because I wanted to show you what to do in case you have a whole bunch of layers and it really slows your computer down if you have one giant smart object. You can just make a smart object out of a composite merge layer and apply your changes that way, and everything is still editable. Let me show you what I mean by that. I'm gonna go into Filter, Camera Raw Filter, and I'm just gonna apply a few adjustments to enhance the image. I'm going to increase the texture to make the details of the image pop. I'm going to increase the clarity, which is contrast and edge pixels. Then I'll increase the vibrance, which is a smart way of adding saturation. It protects already saturated pixels and skin tones. And I'm also gonna go into the Detail tab. And if I drag on the amount slider, I'll of course increase the sharpening. Pushing it all the way to the end will show you that you're applying the effect to the entire image, and you don't always want to do that. So let me bring back the amount to about 30, and I'll show you how to apply the sharpening effect to only certain areas. And to do so, I'm going to use the masking slider. If I hold Alt on Windows, Option on the Mac, and click on the masking slider, it will turn the image white. This is telling us that the sharpening effect is applied to the entire image. But I'm going to continue to hold Alt and drag to the right, and you'll see that Photoshop will start finding the edges. It will make them white and make everything else black. So now this is sort of like a layer mask. Anything that is black will not have the sharpening effect applied to it, and everything that is white will have the sharpening effect applied to it. So you can decide what areas you want the sharpening effect applied to, and then release, and now you're not getting the sharpening effect in the blurry areas, but you are getting them in the areas with detail around his body. So that looks pretty good. Maybe reduce it just a little bit. Next, I'm gonna add an HSL adjustment. You can adjust the hue, saturation, and luminance to these colors. So let's start with the hue. I want the background to be a little bit more in the blues, so I'm gonna shift the blues to the right, also shift the aquas to the right, and maybe the purples to the left, like so. Then I'll go into the saturation tab and increase the saturation of the reds, the oranges, and the yellows to really make Barry stand out. And under luminance, I'll make the blues darker just so that the background is darker. And I'll make the reds and oranges just a little bit brighter, again, to make Barry stand out. If I click on this icon, you can see the before and the after from the adjustments in the HSL. Then I'll go into the split toning. And in the shadows, I'll select the color for the shadows, a hue. So maybe a bluish color and increase the saturation, and that will add blue into the shadows, like so. And finally, I'll go into the Effects tab and add a little bit of grain. And the reason that I'm adding grain is because I blur the background, and without any grain, everything looks so smooth. It looks very computer generated, and I personally don't like that. So I'm just gonna add a little bit of grain, and I'm going to right click and select Fit in View. And I'm also gonna add a little bit of a vignette like so. And I'll increase the highlights so that the vignette doesn't really affect any of the lightning or the highlights. Before and after. I could also click on this icon so you can see the side-by-side view. This is what we started with, and this is what we have now. I'm gonna press OK, and this is almost my final result. I wanna show you one last thing, so just stay tuned. This is gonna explain why I turned this into a smart object. So I like my image, but the one thing I don't like is the green here on the side of this building. So what I'll do is I'll disable these layers. Above the background, I'll create a new layer, and I'll select the brush tool. Make sure that I have a soft brush with a hardness of 0. And with the brush tool active, you can hold Alt on Windows, Option on the Mac to click and sample a color. And I'm just gonna paint over my image like so. And then I'll change the blending mode of that layer to color, which hides that green effect. Also, you can use the eraser tool and just erase the areas that you don't want that blue color to affect. Like I don't want to change the color down here. So before and after. And actually, now that I'm looking at it, maybe I want to bring some of the highlights here as well. Next, I'm going to enable the other layers. And this time I'm going to press Control A on Windows, Command A on the Mac to make a selection over my canvas. And then I'm going to go into Edit, Copy Merged. Then I'm going to enable my final image. I'm going to double click on the thumbnail of this smart object to open it up in a new tab. And I'm going to press Control V, Command V on the Mac to paste. So you can see the two different versions here. I don't need the one in the bottom anymore, so I'm gonna click and drag it into the trash icon. And I'm just gonna close the smart object and save it. And Photoshop will automatically update the smart object. I'm going to press Control D on Windows, Command D on the Mac to deselect. At this point, if the effect is too strong, what you can do is double click on this little icon here, and that will bring up this window that looks a lot like the fade command. And you can click on this slider to adjust the intensity of the camera raw filter. So maybe I can just reduce it down a little bit to about 85%. And I'll press OK. And this is the result without the camera raw filter and with the camera raw filter. And let me know in the comments below what you thought about the techniques shown in this tutorial. Also, don't forget to leave your suggestions for future Copycat Wednesday episodes. If this is your first time at the Photoshop training channel, don't forget to click on that subscribe and notification button so that you don't miss any new Photoshop tutorials. And if you decide to create something using this tutorial, don't forget to share it on Instagram with the hashtag PTCVids. I would love to see what you come up with. And also, don't forget to check out that rim lighting tutorial. Thank you so much for watching. I will talk to you again in the next Photoshop tutorial.